Alrighty team, are we ready? Awesome. Okay, first off, thank you all so much for coming. We appreciate you. So what we're doing today is our kind of community aspect of our multi-jurisdictional hazard mitigation plan update for 2026. So the last update was done in 2021. It is on a 5-year cycle, so we're coming up on 2026, and we are doing that update. So what we're going to do today, we're going to start with introductions, because the good base bone of any resilient community is knowing your neighbors. And then we're going to get into a little bit of a project update. We're going to look at community priorities and some of those community actions. And then we're going to get into our activity, which is basically saying what you want to see in the community and what improvements you want to see made. So hence the activities on the table and on the wall. I will explain them later when we get to that. So introductions to get going. We're going to do name, job if you're comfortable, community you live in, and your favorite summertime snack, because everybody loves an icebreaker. So my name is Bree. I work for the Resiliency Initiative. And so we're a consulting firm that was hired on by the county to do this hazard mitigation plan update. So what is a hazard mitigation plan? So a hazard mitigation plan is essentially, the short end of it, a way to get funding. The nitty-gritty of it is it's a way to prevent issues from arising during a disaster. It's the concept is by identifying what our high-risk hazards are, where are our areas of concern, where are our areas of social vulnerability, how can we mitigate those risks to prevent the impacts of a disaster in the future when it arises, right? And so it also, leverages those resources to, so looking at how we're leveraging the resources that do already exist. And so this is a graphic that I did not make. It is from FEMA, but essentially what you see here is kind of the 5 phases of what the hazard mitigation process looks like. Like I said, it is on a 5-year annual cycle, and that is a federally regulated cycle. And so to receive that funding as it comes, the plan does have to be updated every 5 years. And the idea with that is that each plan, you're coming up with different mitigation actions, you're receiving that funding, you're working on those mitigation projects. The next cycle, you're updating those actions based off of any changed zoning ordinances, any change in building statuses, any change in hazards in the county, right? As we're doing those mitigation projects from the last year's, what's changing in this next 5-year cycle. And so where we're at currently is kind of this in-between of phase 3 and phase 4. So phase 1, what we worked on doing is kind of coordinating with all of our partners, which we'll get into in a few slides, but just really analyzing what already exists, what plans are out there. So looking at the emergency operations plan, looking at building codes, looking at that last hazard mitigation plan, looking at the general plan, safety element, what's already in place that we can look at and review. While a big part of the hazard mitigation plan is creating new strategies to mitigate risk, we also don't believe in recreating the wheel, right? There's already resources out there. We want to utilize those as we move forward in this project. And then with phase 2, hazard identification, y'all know what your hazards are. I don't think anything new really came out of our hazard identification, but just making sure that we're having those conversations and making those updates if we need to. And so what has involvement looked like so far? We have 3 groups, primarily our steering committee, planning team, and stakeholders. Our steering committee is really looking at the core group of this multi-jurisdictional hazard mitigation plan. So within that, it's Calaveras County, Angels Camp, Murphy Sanitary District, and Utica Water and Power Authority. So really looking at that core group. And these are kind of our, for lack of a better term, decision makers when it comes to those groups with this hazard mitigation plan and those jurisdictions. And then we have our planning team. This kind of expands on that. These are going to be more some of those subject matter experts who may know a little bit more nitty-gritty information. So some other county, local departments. We've utilized GIS, as you can see by these lovely, lovely maps on your table. Planning department, things like that. Health and medical, state agencies, Cal OES, Forest Service, things of that nature. Communication companies, utility companies, looking at PG&E, that sort of stuff, right? So more some of those subject matter experts who may be able to provide some of the more nitty-gritty information when it comes to this hazard mitigation plan. And then we have our stakeholders. These are the people that work in the community on the day-to-day basis. These are going to be our nonprofits. These are going to be those people who are working with community members. And so, well, we have that kind of listed right there. Y'all can read that. But so these are going to be people who have a little bit more skin in the game, if you will. While a lot of us in the steering committee and the planning team do live in this community, we wanted to make sure that we have all views. So we wanted to make sure that we're including our stakeholders and our nonprofits and our community groups. So up until this point, our first meeting was just our project kickoff. So that was just with our project team. So those are the people who were essentially the people who created the contract, right? So we're talking about what is our timeline, what is the project looking like, that sort of stuff. Your typical getting in the bones of it. Then we had our project kickoff meeting, which was with our steering committee and our planning team. And that's where we discussed what is it that we're doing with this hazard mitigation plan? What are we looking to do moving forward with it? A big part of this kickoff meeting was looking at identifying those stakeholders and then also narrowing down on a outreach strategy for the public to get involved. And then most recently we had our hazard profile meeting, which was with our steering committee. And what we did there is we had analyzed what the hazards were in the 2021 hazard mitigation plan update and essentially brought it back to the group and kind of discussed what we wanted to do moving forward, making sure that those hazards were still prevalent, making sure that we're documenting the risk correctly, the occurrences correctly, geographic extent, and impacts, right? And so what we did here is, again, that community overview and the review of the hazard profiles. The major changes here is we did remove volcanic activity, which was on the 2021 update. We did decide that that was not a high-risk hazard for Calaveras County, given that y'all don't have any volcanoes. And then additionally, one of the changes we made was in the 2021 plan, climate change was listed as its own hazard. And what we did for this 2026 update was instead of it being its own, we integrated it into every other hazard. So as opposed to it standing alone, we're now explaining what climate change can do to increase the risks or increase the hazards of wildfire. What is climate change doing to make wildfire more prevalent? Drought, right? What are the impacts that climate change is having on drought? So we integrated that into all of the hazards as opposed to it being its standalone on its own. In addition to our steering committee and planning team and stakeholders, we also did a community survey, which, hold on, it has a pointer. Oh, it doesn't work on the TV. 160 responses is fantastic. That is great. I have done lots of community hazard mitigation plans. Typically, if I break 60, I'm excited. So having 160 is fantastic. And typically, we asked questions around demographics, right? So kind of like what we did here, we didn't ask people in the survey to give me their favorite summertime snack. That didn't seem relevant. But we did ask them what community they live in. Also awareness, so asking people if they're aware of what a hazard mitigation plan was or is. And then also looking at hazard and community asset priorities and mitigation action identification. And so what we did with kind of the last two is we used it to verify what we had come up with our steering committee and planning team. So as opposed to the steering committee getting to just decide for the hazard mitigation plan for the whole county, we did back that up with the results of the survey. So I don't have it, oh yeah, I do. So as you can see, kind of like from this bottom one, volcanic risk, not concerned, right? So the survey results support what we have decided with our hazard profile, with our steering committee. In addition to wildfire being highest risk, highest priority from the community members, supporting and backing up what we identified with our hazard profile with our steering committee. So this is what the hazard rankings were decided on for Calaveras County. I'm not going to go into everything, y'all can read, but really focusing on, right, what are our priorities? So as we all know, wildfire, highest priority for the county, right? In addition to flood, extreme cold and winter storms, and extreme heat, and then as well as drought, are those high priority risks for the county. And so what we did here is we categorized by geographic extent, probability, and magnitude and severity. Each of these are, it's explained further in the plan, but ranked on a scale of either 1 to 4. Depending on how we ranked them, we gave them that number, tallied them, and that's how we came up with the risk summary of being low, medium, or high. So it was based on the 3 categories you see here. Geographic extent and magnitude and severity were voted on by the steering committee. And then probability, it was probability. We use science. So we basically took what occurrences had occurred in the past and times that by the amount of years over which they occurred, and then we divided them. So that's how we came up with the probability, whether it be unlikely, likely, occasional, highly likely, right? So the more often it occurred, the higher it was. Hence wildfire being very highly likely. Y'all get a lot of those, right? And then Angels Camp, pretty consistent. Looking at wildfire, extreme cold and winter, and drought being those high priority hazards. And then I did not list Murphy's Sanitary District or Utica Water and Power, or Power and Water Authority. They're in the plan, but with this being more of a community meeting, wasn't super necessary. A lot of them align with Angels Camp, with Utica Power and Water having a higher risk summary for dam failure, given that they own dams. So as we get into this next section, looking at community priorities, this information was pulled from our survey. So community priorities were given to us by the community. So looking at community vulnerabilities, we looked at 6 categories. So looking at human, economic, infrastructure, cultural and historical, environmental, and governance. And so looking at this from a hazard lens, so we had community members essentially write out what their concerns were when a hazard occurs in these categories. And so what we kind of came down to is as listed above, but looking at human, I would say you have your commonalities, you have your common categories that you'll see across pretty much most counties. You have your high-risk individuals, so your individuals with disability, low income, elderly, things like that. But some of the special things that came up for Calaveras County specifically are going to be those individuals without secure communication, as well as individuals in rural areas, which I believe there's some overlap there, right? And then as well as new residents and individuals in short-term rentals. So when it comes to those last two categories, looking at if you're not from here and you stay at a VRBO and you get snowed in, you don't know what to do, right? If you're going to a place that's going to have different hazards than what you know what to deal with, it's a change, right? You're going to be more vulnerable when those hazards arise. And then some things that arose for economic, looking at job availability and small businesses. Job availability, there may not be much that you can do in a hazard mitigation plan for that, but small businesses, there can. Some of the issues that came up that community members were concerned about are small businesses coming back after disasters and small businesses being impacted by disasters, right? In a hazard mitigation plan, we can put in mitigation actions around a small business preparedness campaign. Easy as that, right? Which can help support that and help support small businesses coming back. Infrastructure, pretty common things that you see across counties, right? You have communications, power, water, internet, your normal infrastructure stuff. And so looking at how can we update those systems, especially in a county like Calaveras, a lot of the concerns were around aging infrastructure. So just making sure that we're kind of coming into the mitigation strategy session with that in mind, and coming to, later on with some of our subject matter experts, coming to them with like, hey, these are the concerns that community members have. What are your ideas, right? And then getting into cultural and historical sites. Again, your pretty common everyday ones, parks, community gathering sites, Native American sites, that sort of stuff. Environmental, this is looking at, what are people's concerns? So air quality is a big one, especially with wildfires being prevalent in the county, and not only in the county, but across the state, right? Air moves, shocker. So even if a wildfire occurs outside the county, that can impact the air quality in the county. So what are we doing? Is there anything, right? What are those ideas that are coming up, and what are we thinking in the future with that being a concern of community members? And then governance, more and more, definitely again, pretty common. Biggest concern is increased insurance costs. Looking at emergency response capacity, alternative energy investment, emergency planning, funding and resources, and community outreach and engagement. So what are we doing as we're kind of moving forward with this? Again, making sure that we're having community members' voices in mind. And then community asset priorities. This is what the community wants to focus on. They want to focus on hospitals, fire and police stations, schools, small businesses, and major bridges. Those are our top 5, right? So what we had them do here is essentially just rank them. So in the survey, the categories were listed out, and individuals were able to go in and prioritize and rank what their priorities were for the county and where they wanted to see the most investment going into as we move forward. Any questions on any of that? Or I don't want to focus too much on it because I do want to get to the activity. But if there's anything I missed here, also open to it if you were unable to do the survey or anything like that. Fantastic. Okay. So getting into the activity, what we want to do moving forward is we don't want to focus on the problems anymore. Problems are there. We want to think about solutions, right? And so what we're going to do is start thinking about those solutions and how we want to see the community grow in the next 5 years until the next hazard mitigation plan update. And so what we want to do is we do want to focus on kind of these primary 5 mitigation goals. Goal number 1 being minimizing risk and vulnerability. That one's pretty straightforward. Goal number 2, provide protection for critical facilities, infrastructure, utilities, and services from hazard impacts. And with this one, I think that's why it's important that we do this plan from a multi-jurisdictional lens, making sure that we're including UWPA and Murphy Sanitary District. And then goal number 3, improving public awareness, education, and preparedness for hazards. In a county like Calaveras, y'all are very knowledgeable. Again, especially with wildfires, right? You deal with this on an annual basis. It's nothing new. But as new strategies come out, what are we doing to make sure that individuals and community members are staying up to date with new knowledge that may be coming and may be kind of arising, right? Goal number 4, increasing community capabilities to be prepared for, respond to, and recover from a disaster event. So I think with this one, what I like to kind of remind people of is that community is the backbone of everything. Yes, we can all respond to disasters on our own, but that's not going to give you the ideal outcome that you're looking for. So when it comes to this goal, really looking at what are the things that build community. And I think that's where my job comes in as the person who writes the hazard mitigation plan, is to take any ideas you have and morph it to a lens that allows it to fit into the hazard mitigation plan, right? So I think the reminder here is that no idea is a bad idea, but that it doesn't have to necessarily have a disaster focus when we're coming up with these mitigation strategies, right? So building a community center and community programming can be included in a hazard mitigation plan because it boosts community coming together, sharing resources, sharing knowledge, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be all disaster all the time. My job is to morph what you give me and make it appropriate to fit into the plan. And then goal number 5, why we're all here, and really should be goal number 1, but we want to maintain funding. So to receive FEMA funding, this plan does have to be done as of now. I do think there's been some updates going on, and I think they're trying to change that, but for the foreseeable future, this does have to be done to receive quite a few of the FEMA funds. So as we're getting into the activity, so on the wall you'll see we have 3 nice little blank sheets for you to write on if you so choose. I hope you do. So we have environmental, societal, and infrastructural. And what I want you to do here is just brainstorm. Just word vomit on the sheet of paper. Any idea you have, anything you want to see in the community that you want to be done better, go ahead and write it down, right? Like I said, my job is to translate that. Any ideas you have, you just write it down. And then also on the tables, you'll see 3 maps. That, again, GIS is great and GIS made. And so for the maps, we have societal vulnerabilities, road and bridge vulnerabilities, and then miscellaneous vulnerabilities. But the concept with these is to make sure that I know what y'all are concerned about and where y'all are concerned. And so with these, with the Post-it notes, and there's instructions on the table, but if there's any concerns you have, so for societal, if you have a concern over a certain nursing home, write down that nursing home. If you have a concern for a certain reason, write that down, right? Maybe there can be rules, regulations in place about I guess it technically already is, but better disaster planning for nursing homes or whatever that is, right? But give me as much information as you can. If you just put a Post-it note and it's blank, I'm not really going to know what that means. So make sure that what you want to be said is said in a way that I can comprehend it. And then for road and bridge vulnerabilities, I feel like that one's pretty self-explanatory. But just as you're writing those down, make sure you put crossroads, again, just so I can know where y'all's concern is. And write down any information, whether, this road's crumbling, it's prone to landslides, this bridge is old, whatever that is, just let me know. And then miscellaneous. So in case there's just anything else, I wanted to make sure y'all had options. So for miscellaneous, if there's anything, again, just give me as much information as you can, write it on that Post-it note, and put it on the map in the general area. And so with the activities on the wall, I did want to give y'all just some examples up here. So these are some examples that we've put in hazard mitigation plans in the past, but hazard mitigation plans should not be boilerplate. They should be special to each community that they're made for, because each community is different. So while these are some ideas, use your imagination, I guess. But I think with these two is the same of the more information, the better. So if you want to secure a new generator for a critical facility, let me know which critical facility, right? When we're doing our hazard mitigation plan, we want to make sure that it's specific in ways it needs to be, so that as we move forward and we're writing grants, it makes it easier on the back end. Y'all are paying me to write this plan. Let me help you make it easier for you when you're writing those grants, right? Yeah, any questions about the activity? Okay, so I'm gonna do this to kind of wrap it up. So as we move forward, we will work on our action implementation meeting, which is gonna be with our steering committee. And what we're gonna do there is working with what we're given from you guys, what we've been given in the survey. We'll work with our steering committee to essentially kind of work on divvying those out, saying who's doing what their priorities are, things like that. And then as we move forward, we will be updating on the hazard mitigation plan OES website, which is where this QR code goes to. And then for anybody who's watching, if you have any ideas, I would love to hear them. So this is my email. But yeah, so for those in the room, would love your participation. And if you have any questions, I'll be here. So, yeah.